Before we begin, please tell us what city you're from. We're curious to know where our listeners are tuning in from. Subscribe, give us a like, and watch until the end. Let's start. Sometimes, in the most secluded hamlets, events occur that completely turn life as we know it upside down. On that cool autumn night, as the mournful howl of an unknown beast echoed outside, no one in the vicinity could have imagined that this wolf would become the main character in the most incredible and touching stories of the past decades. But that's exactly what happened, and it all began with a mysterious visitor who one day appeared at the doorstep of a lonely young woman's home. Nestled beside a dense forest, on the very edge of a small rural community, stands a small, weathered but well-kept cottage. In this cottage lives a young woman named Carolyn. Not long ago, she inherited the house from her aunt and moved here from the county seat, hoping to find peace and fully enjoy the simplicity of country life. Her modest belongings consist of a few antique chairs, a couple of bookshelves, and a pair of chests left by the previous owners. The main living soul at her place is her dog, Nina, a mongrel, but incredibly loyal. In the evenings, Nina lies on the porch, nose to the wind, guarding her owner from chance passers-by and neighborhood cats. Until recently, Caroline's life had been quiet and uneventful. By day, she busied herself with household chores, tending vegetables in her small garden, caring for her chickens, and in the evenings, she read by the fireplace or chatted with neighbors who dropped by. But for several days now, strange rumors had been circulating in the village about a gray wolf that had appeared in broad daylight on the road and startled a few hikers. The wolf bothered no one. It simply stopped a few paces away and stared, as if with silent reproach, then slowly disappeared into the shadows of the trees. The neighbors noticed that the wolf lingered at the very edge of the woods, not particularly shy of human dwellings. The men on the bench outside the village store sarcastically dubbed him the Lone Wolf, because the animal, according to them, was young, strong, but clearly solitary. Didn't get along with his pack, so he's on his own, looking for a mate. But if such a moniker can be said jestingly about single men, about a wild animal, it sounded far more eerie. Caroline initially brushed off these conversations, assuming that people in the village loved to gossip about anything. But then she too began to notice, at night, something rustled behind her house, scratched at the fence, and Nina suddenly stopped barking. The dog behaved strangely. She would run warily to the gate and fall silent, barely sniffing the air. One particularly cold evening, Caroline saw Nina suddenly wag her tail happily and run towards the fence. The young woman peered out the window and froze. A huge gray wolf stood by the fence. It looked from the dog to the window where Caroline stood still. There was something unusual in its eyes, not aggression, not fear, but rather curiosity and weariness. Caroline recoiled sharply, her heart pounding so loud it felt as if the whole neighborhood could hear it. But the wolf didn't bat an eye at her fright, as if accustomed to such reactions. Caroline understood that if this truly was a wolf, it could pose a threat. But something about the creature kept her from complete fear. Perhaps it was its calm gaze and the fact that Nina had acted so friendly. She decided to discuss it with her neighbors and, if possible, cautiously investigate the situation before raising an alarm. The next morning, Caroline went to the store for bread and a few necessities. Near the shop, as always, the local men were already sitting and idly chatting. As Caroline approached, one of them, Gus, looked at her with narrowed eyes. "Heard about our lone wolf?" he said. "They say he's been coming closer to people lately. Maybe he's visited you, too." "Me?" Caroline asked, trying to appear calm. "No, wouldn't know. My Nina thought someone was by the fence." "Well, I'll tell you," another man chimed in, old Don Esteban, gray-haired and always full of jests. "That's no ordinary wolf. Listen, Gus, maybe he's looking for a partner. It's nothing new, a young animal full of life, so he roams about like a suitor." The men guffawed. Caroline pretended to laugh along with them, though inside she felt uneasy. A wild animal so close to her home, it's not safe. After getting her groceries, she quickly said her goodbyes and headed home. On the way, she thought, what if the wolf really could become aggressive? What should I do? Who can I ask for help? However, days passed, and the strange gray creature continued to visit only Nina, and showed not the slightest hint of aggression. The villagers began to gossip more actively. Some insisted that this wolf wasn't afraid of people at all. Others spooked everyone with stories of forest predators who were supposedly just biding their time, waiting for the opportune moment to attack. Caroline was a sensible person. She decided she needed to figure this out herself. "I just won't go into the woods alone," she told herself, "and I can certainly handle things in my own yard. If necessary, I'll call the men, and we'll set traps." But deep down, Caroline knew she didn't want to harm the wolf. The more she thought about him, the more her curiosity gnawed at her. Why did he persistently appear at her home? And why did Nina accept him as if he were no enemy at all? One night, woken by an unexplained noise, Caroline cautiously looked out into the yard. The moon shone so brightly that everything was almost as clear as day. The wolf sat by Nina's doghouse, a huge gray figure, tense yet not hostile. Caroline's heart pounded so loudly that it seemed she could hear its booming echo in the yard. The moment she made a sharp movement, the wolf turned its head and stared at the window. The young woman felt as if it could see her through the glass, but the animal didn't run away. It only shifted slightly, as if getting used to a human presence. Out of the corner of her eye, Caroline noticed something glinting on the animal's neck. Could it be a collar? The thought flashed through her mind, and immediately it seemed ridiculous. A wild wolf wearing a collar? But looking closer, she realized she hadn't been mistaken. There really was some kind of strap or rope around its neck, constricting its throat. This explained why the animal had difficulty eating. Apparently, it couldn't open its mouth wide enough, and that's why it lunged at food but couldn't quite swallow it. The next morning, though her hands trembled, Caroline decided to take a bold step. She took a large piece of meat and went out into the yard. She crept along the fence to the spot where she had seen the wolf's tracks. She placed the bowl on the ground and retreated to the cover of the old shed. Hidden, she waited, and she didn't have to wait long. The wolf, and it was him, undoubtedly the same one, appeared almost silently. Quietly, like a shadow, it padded towards the bowl. It sniffed the meat, licked it eagerly. Then it tried to grasp it with its teeth, but recoiled sharply, whimpering. Opening its mouth was clearly painful or simply impossible for it. Caroline's heart ached with pity. Watching the creature try to lick something, anything, from the bowl, she felt helpless. It still managed to lick a piece, but it couldn't truly eat it. The wolf lay down nearby and, it seemed, let out a heavy sigh. Nina, hearing her guest snuffle, poked her head out of the doghouse, wanting to run over, but her owner called the dog back, fearing that the wild animal might attack her unexpectedly. The wolf raised its muzzle and stared directly at Caroline, who had been secretly watching all this time. Their gazes met for only a couple of seconds, but it was enough to send a strange shiver through the young woman's soul. This was no longer fear or horror, but rather the sensation that before her was not just an animal, but a living creature pleading for help. A new day dawned, and Caroline's mind kept returning to the same image, the wolf, unable to eat, with that dreadful strap around its neck. Who could have done this to him? The young woman wondered. The villagers, of course, didn't take it seriously. They just joked when she tried to share her observations. They advised her to set traps or call hunters, but Caroline, despite her fear, no longer wanted such an outcome. Besides, Nina herself reacted to the wolf in a friendly way. That evening, Caroline did the same thing. She cut up meat into small pieces and placed the bowl by the fence. This time, it worked. The wolf was able to lick and swallow the small pieces, though it was clear he did so with immense difficulty. Caroline crouched in the shadows a few steps away. She watched the animal carefully, unnaturally pressing its head to its chest as it ate her offering. "Poor thing," she whispered. At that moment, the wolf suddenly froze. It turned its head and looked directly at the young woman. Although they were only a few feet apart, Caroline felt no threat. On the contrary, her heart welled with warmth. She couldn't explain the feeling, but it seemed to her that the wolf would neither attack nor flee. It had decided to stay there because it needed help, and she had to help. Caroline quietly called out, "Hey, buddy, don't be afraid of me. I won't hurt you." The wolf continued to watch, wary, but without any signs of panic. It seemed to understand that before it was the only person who hadn't yet tried to harm it. For 3 consecutive evenings, they repeated this peculiar ritual. Caroline cut the meat, went out, and left the bowl in its usual spot. The wolf would emerge from the darkness, eat, finally getting some sustenance, and stay nearby, as if waiting for more to be offered. On the 4th evening, Caroline dared to approach closer. She knew it was risky, but there was no other way to remove the cursed collar. Pleased with her success, she said aloud, not even knowing why, "Well then, Lobo," she called him Wolf in Spanish, "let's get acquainted. You don't like that choke collar, do you? Let me try to help." The wolf flinched at the sound of her voice, but didn't run away. As Caroline approached almost completely, her insides tightened. She saw a horrible sight. The leather strap, visibly dusty and cracked, was so deeply embedded in its neck that it left a reddish mark on its fur. The wolf was breathing heavily. Its eyes showed unease, but it didn't growl or try to snap. It waited patiently, as if understanding. This young woman could save him. Caroline slowly extended her hand. Her fingers lightly touched his scruff. The wolf flinched. She gently stroked his neck, trying to find the buckle, but the strap had grown so deeply embedded that she couldn't unfasten it. So the young woman took out a small penknife, which she had hidden in her pocket at home, sensing that she would have to cut it. The wolf flinched, seeing the glint of the blade. Caroline quickly hid the knife in her palm, whispering soothingly, "Shh, shh, I won't hurt you. I'm just helping." Her heart pounded in her chest, her hands trembled, but she gathered her strength. She carefully slipped the blade between the strap and the animal's neck. It took several frantic movements to cut through the material, At one point, the wolf whimpered, shook its head, and Caroline almost dropped the knife. But she still managed to cut the cursed collar. Pulling it from the animal's neck, she flung the mangled strip of leather aside. It showed some rivets and rusty spikes. Caroline briefly noticed a faint engraving on the metal tag, something like initial letters worn away by time. The wolf abruptly sprang back and, it seemed, was about to flee. But sensing sudden freedom, it stopped. It took a few deep breaths, blinked, looking at Caroline and Nina, who had poked her snout out of the doghouse. Then it raised its head and, stepping heavily, leaped over the fence and disappeared into the night's silence. The young woman remained standing, her heart pounding furiously with the collar in her hands. She expected to see blood or serious wounds, but fortunately the animal's skin was only chafed. "It will heal, then," Caroline thought with relief. The next morning she went to the store. As easily as showing her palm, she presented the collared strap to the men and women who loved to dissect everyone's business. They couldn't believe their eyes. "Well, I'll be," they murmured, turning the find over in their hands, surprised. "Where did a wild wolf get such gear?" Someone suggested it wasn't a wolf at all, but a wild, lost, feral dog. But old Don Esteban shook his head. "No, sons, I saw him. That's definitely a wolf, just an unusual one. They say a young wolf escaped from a training facility a few years back. Maybe that's him. They sometimes put special collars on those animals so they don't get confused with others. See the initial P? And the owner of that facility is Sir Percival. So there's your P for you." The men threw up their hands, and Caroline just shrugged. And then she frowned, remembering that a certain Sir Percival indeed owned a hunting lodge in the county seat, where, according to rumors, wild animals were kept for dog training. Being friends with him, to put it mildly, was not advisable. The man, they said, was harsh, and he had a difficult temperament. Returning home, Caroline resumed her usual tasks, but her thoughts kept returning to the wolf. She wondered if he would appear again now that he was free, or perhaps he had already gone deep into the forest to regain his strength and live as a wild animal should. The next evening, Caroline's fears vanished. The wolf returned, but now he clearly felt more confident. He let her get closer and devoured larger pieces of meat than before. When Lobo, as Caroline secretly called him, finally realized he could properly chew his food, he emitted a short grunt of satisfaction, more like a sigh of relief. The young woman smiled. The wolf looked comical, as if surprised himself by his suddenly returned ability to eat normally. From that day on, the animal visited less often. Apparently, he could now hunt on his own and no longer needed constant handouts from a human. However, Caroline continued to keep meat ready, and deep down she found herself missing his visits. Her daily routine slowly settled into a familiar rhythm. Morning chores, the store, chats with neighbors, and in the evenings she would peer towards the edge of the forest. Nina, too, began to periodically pull towards the fence, sniffing, anticipating the forest guest's arrival. One evening, as Caroline was about to go to bed, she heard a rustle in the yard and a soft whimper. Opening the door, she found an unexpected sight. Lobo sat by Nina's doghouse, and Nina was wagging her tail joyfully. The moment the young woman appeared, the wolf smoothly rose, took a couple of hesitant steps towards her, flattened its ears as if apologizing for coming without an invitation. Caroline let out a restrained sigh and said with a chuckle, "Well, hello, Lobo. It seems you're drawn here for more than just dinner, aren't you?" The wolf snorted. Glimmers of moonlight danced in his dark eyes. Caroline noted that he looked healthier than before. His fur was no longer so disheveled, and his gaze was alert. Nina approached, trustingly sniffing his muzzle. The wolf gently nudged her side with his nose. The young woman found the scene tender, almost romantic. "A wolf in love with my dog. Who would have thought?" she murmured with a smile. However, the wonderful mood was soon disrupted by a visit from someone Caroline least wanted to see. In the daytime, a stranger approached her house, introduced himself as Raoul, and said he was Sir Percival's right-hand man. Apparently, Sir Percival had heard about the escaped wolf hanging around this village and ordered him to capture the animal alive to return it to the facility. Seeing a well-filled cartridge belt on Raoul's neck and his rough hunter's hands, Caroline immediately felt an internal aversion. Their conversation took place on the porch. "Do you know where this wolf is now?" Raoul began his interrogation. "No," the young woman replied curtly. "I don't keep track of him." "But you removed his collar." He narrowed his eyes. "We know everything. I propose a collaboration. If you help catch the animal, Sir Percival will reward you financially." Caroline frowned and almost hissed. "Thank you. I don't need your money. And your wolf is not my enemy. I don't know what games you played with him, but I have no desire to be involved." Raoul began to protest, but Caroline retorted, "Leave, and don't come back. There's nothing for you here." Slamming the gate shut, the young woman remained standing in the yard, seething with indignation. What kind of training facilities? Her mind raged. She had grown accustomed to seeing the wolf as almost a sentient being. She understood he was a forest predator, but for some reason she felt compassion for him. After all, the animal had not attacked her or any other residents, and it was only because he had fallen into the cruel system of hunting sports that he was forced to wander and seek salvation from people who would not harm him. Anxiety settled over her. Will this Raoul show up with traps? Will he start shooting? Caroline, though far removed from the hunting trade, understood that sooner or later Sir Percival himself might arrive with a whole retinue of henchmen, and then no Nina would save Lobo. What if the wolf goes deep into the forest and never returns? The thought flashed. But an inner voice whispered that he would return, and so it happened. After a couple of days, Lobo appeared in the yard again, only now Caroline, fearing a possible ambush, tried not to go out to him, so as not to attract the attention of ill-wishers. She just cracked open the window and watched him play with Nina. In these moments, the young woman felt a strange mixed emotion: joy that the wolf was healthy and still alive, and worry for his future. "Oh, Lobo," she thought, "do you know how dangerous it is now to approach people?" Winter was approaching. One cold day, Nina became restless, often whimpering and burrowing into her bedding in the doghouse. Caroline noticed that the dog had noticeably rounded out in the sides. "Well, I'll be," the young woman thought. "Are you going to be a mother soon, girl?" The thought of who the father of the future litter might be caught Caroline off guard, but remembering the wolf's frequent visits, it wasn't hard to guess. When Nina finally whelped, Caroline discovered 5 puppies in her doghouse. They were tiny, warm, squealing, and jostling. 4 had the distinctive gray fur that could be mistaken for wolf fur, and one was completely black, like its mother. Caroline didn't know whether to cry or laugh. Imagine! The result of the most incredible village rumors and guesses was now snuffling in her yard. Naturally, the news of the half-wolf puppies quickly spread throughout the area. The men at the store began to tease, "Well, Caroline, now you don't just have a wolf in your yard, but a whole pack will soon grow up. That'll be a hoot." The women weren't far behind. "Ah, the affectionate dog. Seems like the wolf spirit blew, and their fates got intertwined." Someone would add sarcastically, "Beware, Caroline. Soon you'll have dogs and wolves hunting all of us in your yard." But broadly speaking, no one wished her ill. The wolf hadn't attacked any livestock or children, and everyone saw that Caroline had never been aggressive towards the animal, so she was hardly to blame. Some saw it all as a wild but beautiful story. Others squinted suspiciously. It won't be long before a whole pack starts roaming. But the real problem turned out to be not the rumors, but the arrival of Sir Percival himself. One sunny but chilly day, a jeep pulled into Caroline's yard, and out stepped a robust man with a predatory squint. She immediately guessed it was the owner of the hunting facility. Raoul wasn't with him. Sir Percival entered the gate, looked around, and grunted disapprovingly, "So, you're the lady who's been feeding my wolf? Excellent. I hope you have a few minutes for me?" Caroline tried to maintain her composure, though inside she was seething. She remembered how easily Lobo could overcome anyone who threatened his freedom, but he was still no match for people with weapons and power. "I don't understand what you want," the young woman said dryly. "I want my property back," Percival cut in. "My wolf escaped from the ranch. I can provide documents if necessary. I need him alive. And, of course, I'd buy the pups from you. Wolf-dog hybrids are in high demand right now with certain wealthy clients." Rage simmered in Caroline's chest. "What property, for heaven's sake? How can you call a living creature property?" But she held herself back. "I'm not selling any puppies, and I don't have your wolf. He's in the forest. If he wants to come, he will. If not, that's his business." Sir Percival narrowed his eyes. "Do you understand that if I deem it necessary, I'll come here with licensed hunters, round up every wolf in the area, and still get what I want?" "Try it," Caroline squeezed out bitterly. "I doubt anyone in the village will be pleased to see you." At these words, Nina poked her snout out of the doghouse. Fluffy tiny bundles began to peep out after her. Sir Percival noticed them and smirked. "Well, well, I see we have quite a family here. I see the father was busy. Consider them my property, too." Caroline couldn't take it any more. "Get out!" Her eyes flashed, her voice trembled. Sir Percival, clearly accustomed to people's fear and powerlessness before him, tensed, apparently not expecting such defiance. He took a couple of steps towards Caroline, as if to grab her arm, but then something happened that he certainly hadn't foreseen. From somewhere near the fence came a low, furious growl. In a split second, a familiar gray muzzle appeared over the fence. It was Lobo. With one agile, spring-like leap, the wolf cleared the obstacle and in mere seconds jumped on the unwelcome guest, knocking him into the mud. Sir Percival screamed in fright and possibly pain as the wolf clearly sank its fangs into his jacket. For another second, the animal held the man to the ground, growling with all its might. It seemed ready to tear its enemy apart. Caroline grew cold with terror. But Lobo did not go completely wild, nor did he clamp onto the unfortunate man's neck. He merely threatened, showing that he wouldn't let his family be harmed. Sir Percival, in horror, covered his face with his hands. Then, waiting for the moment when the wolf recoiled, he tumbled sideways and scrambled into the house. He slammed the door shut and began to yell, "Tie up your beast! He'll maim us all!" Caroline watched Lobo, who stood between the house and Nina's doghouse, as if continuing to protect the puppies and their owner. This was no mere lone wolf. He exuded a confidence, a sense of responsibility for everything connected to this woman and her dog. Understanding that Sir Percival wouldn't simply leave, the young woman told him to exit carefully, assuring him that Lobo wouldn't touch him if he kept his distance from the puppies. When he finally emerged, breathing heavily, with a torn sleeve, only a few yards separated him from the wolf. Caroline stood next to the gray animal, her hand resting on his scruff. He growled, but did not lunge. Sir Percival, realizing he was dealing with a truly wild wolf that no longer belonged to him, began to curse and shout that the young woman would regret her foolishness. Then he rushed out of the gate and immediately started his car, tearing away from the spot. Judging by his curses, he promised to return. But she didn't want to think about that. The main thing was that no one was truly hurt right now. After the uninvited guest left, Caroline sank exhausted onto the porch. She was trembling. Everything could have ended tragically just moments ago. She looked at Lobo. The wolf stood nearby, looking from her to the doghouse with the puppies. It seemed to understand that it had done the right thing, protecting its offspring and its friend, the dog Nina. The young woman wasn't afraid of him for a second. She reached out and carefully stroked his head. He merely snorted softly and calmly nudged her shoulder with his forehead, as if saying, "I'm here, don't be afraid." Months passed, and the puppies began to grow. They were exceptionally curious, energetic, and beautiful. 3 boys and 2 girls, in whom shimmered both canine docility and a wolfish fire in their eyes. Caroline understood. Keeping such a company in her domestic yard would not be easy. The neighbors were already giving her side glances, and Sir Percival was still out there somewhere, and no one knew if he would return. When the puppies became quite lively, they almost ruined the entire garden, trampling the beds. So Caroline had to quickly build them a larger enclosure. Time went by, and one morning the young woman noticed that 4 of the puppies had disappeared. Only one remained, the blackest one, just like its mother. Caroline felt an anxious pang in her heart. She rushed to search, but found the little ones nowhere. Suddenly, Nina let out a soft whine, and from the forest came Lobo's answering howl. It seemed the pups had followed their father. Caroline was initially scared that they had been taken, but quickly understood. It was in the nature of animals to go where they belonged. Let it be so, the young woman thought bitterly. They might be better off in the wild. And one stayed with me. Maybe it's fate. Caroline couldn't shake the poignant feeling of loss. It was as if several fluffy creatures she had been proud of and rejoiced in had now been claimed by nature itself. But she tried to comfort herself with the thought that Lobo wouldn't let them come to harm. After all, he was already accustomed to caring for his small pack, and she couldn't be a full mother to them in the wild forest. Weeks passed. Lobo visited Nina's yard less and less often. Apparently, he now had obligations, his own pack, however small. Caroline felt wistful at such times, though she understood that keeping a wild animal was unnatural and cruel. Then he stopped coming altogether. The young woman went out many evenings listening to the howling wind, hoping to hear his familiar call, but only a deep, heavy silence fell. Perhaps that's how it was meant to be. One morning, before dawn, Caroline woke to an unfamiliar noise. A strange premonition enveloped her. Nina stood by the window staring furiously towards the forest. The young woman looked out and went cold with horror. A slain wolf lay in the middle of the yard. Thankfully, it wasn't Lobo, but another animal, seemingly a stray that had wandered near human homes. But the fact that it had been shot right on the edge of the village meant one thing. The hunt was now practically at her doorstep. Clenching her fists, Caroline whispered softly, "Be careful, Lobo." Her suspicions pointed to the ruthless Sir Percival, determined to deal with all the wolves in the area. But there was no proof. Anxiety clung to the young woman for several more weeks. However, fate, as if testing her resilience, granted an unexpected continuation to the story. 6 months later, an unusual pack of young, vibrant, and strong wolves began to be seen in the forest. Some hunters claimed to have seen a leader with dark fur among them, with gray wolves resembling Lobo by his side. It was rumored that this was a new breed, a hybrid, but no one dared to approach them. Still, not a single case of attack on people was recorded. One early morning, Caroline stepped onto the porch, as always, to watch the sunrise. And suddenly, she heard a soft rustling at the very edge of the woods. She froze. A familiar figure emerged from the forest, the very same large wolf. For a split second, their gazes met. The wolf stood still and, without a sound, disappeared among the pine trees. But in this silent encounter, Caroline felt a quiet, almost familial connection. Tears welled in her eyes, and she felt an overwhelming gratitude for everything that had happened to her. She seemed to understand. Lobo was alive, he had his own pack, and that meant life went on, and everything would be all right. For all that was left for her was to embrace this amazing turn of events and move forward. The story of the wild wolf, who once knocked at people's windows, seeking not only salvation, but perhaps his forest love, became a legend in this little village. Caroline was often asked if she had seen her Lobo again, and she would just smile and gaze toward the edge of the forest. Even if their paths never crossed again, the connection between them would remain forever, just as in the forest twilight there is always room for the moonlight. Thank you for listening to the story to the end. If you'd like to keep receiving similar stories, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you don't miss new episodes. Wishing you well, warmth, and may there always be room for a miracle in your life.